Wood is with us. Keith, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, gents. How are you getting on?
Yeah, good. There's some rugby on the field that we'll talk about in a while, but I did want to talk to you about some of the off-field stuff that's happened since last we've spoken. It's been confirmed now that ITV and BBC will continue to show the Six Nations in England. This comes hot on the heels of the news that Virgin Media and RTE are going to be showing it in Ireland. And I think this is a rebuttal of most people's worst fears about what CBC would do when they come in as part shareholders of the Six Nations. The assumption had been that everything would go behind a paywall and every last cent would be wrung out of the TV rights. That doesn't appear to be the case. Does this change how we feel about the investment money from CBC? Does it change in any way how we feel about the future of the game?
Yeah, I'm still confused, or not conflicted. I don't know what the word is. I don't really know what to think yet about CBC, about what they will bring to the table. But what they've done now is given a sense of certainty that it's going to be free to air. And I think if you look at other sports over the last 20 years, the ones that drop off in participation are the ones that have gone behind a paywall. And that makes life an awful lot more difficult for the game to grow, even though it's more beneficial for the players at the top of the game. So look, I thought it was great news because the amount of millions that can watch it in the UK and in Ireland, you know, it just takes an awful lot more pressure off it. And also, I think international sport in particular leaves a bad taste if you have to pay pay-per-view to watch it or go behind a paywall. I just think it makes it very, very uncomfortable for me. And I go back to sitting with my mother in the early 80s, listening to Fred Cogley, watching RTE and watching the great rugby of the Five Nations at that stage. That's the memory of my youth. You want the kids of today to have elements of that as well, and not to just be behind a paywall.
One of the big conversations that we would have been having around State of the Union when COVID hit first was what the future of the rugby calendar was like. And recently we had Stuart Lancaster on, and he was saying, you know, in the Southern Hemisphere they have this remarkable split season where you get your players, you have a competition, the competition ends, they go off and play international rugby, the competition ends, you get them back, and it's like, oh yeah, when you put it like that, it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, look, we've been having that conversation, you and I in particular, actually, Ger. We kind of like a lot of the regular season in the NFL. The idea that there is a season for it and that you tend not to turn the players into commodities, because that's part of what happens if you're playing for 48 or 49 weeks of the season. Also, I think when you look at rugby, and these are the conversations that we had in State of the Union, which we're definitely going to have again, is the viability of the game, the ability to be able to pay players for that period of time. It's almost unsustainable. That's why there's a new competition every 2 or 3 years. They're trying to concertina more games in, whereas my own view is less games is probably better, less number of players, less subs on the field. For me, less is an awful lot better of what's happening. So I think we're seeing the game being consolidated an awful lot more at the present moment in time, partly because money is coming into it. They want to maximize their return, but they also want to maximize the product. And I'm wondering whether their view of it is that less may be more. It may be in line with what I think anyway, but they're trying to play for the amount of times and the amount of tournaments. It's too fragmented. It gets set into too many different TV stations. So you're having to buy 3 or 4 different types of subscriptions to be able to watch the game that you want to watch. And I think it's a mess at the moment, but I do feel it's on the right path to tidy itself up. And I still say this time and time again, but rugby is a very young professional sport. People are trying to make decisions for the information that they have at any one moment in time. And I think some decisions have been very poor, some have been very good. So Actually, well, there's one nice piece of news came out in the last week or so, was that the Lions was definitely going to have its place in 4 years' time. It wasn't going to be fighting for its position in the calendar. It was going to be considered to be central to what rugby was. And for me, that's an important element, and that's kind of one summer ticked off.
The Rainbow Cup was something that obviously came in for a huge amount of criticism because of the way that it ended up being played out. And fair enough, right? It's not anything like what it was supposed to be, or what it would have been under the circumstances if COVID hadn't happened. And yet, in the midst of it, the games have actually been really good. The players have been battering each other and clearly into the results and the outcomes. I even caught some of the end of one of the South African games, which was brilliant, won by like an 87th minute penalty. And it's like these local matches, familiarity breeds contempt between the players. That's the type of thing supporters can get behind. The local conferences in a bigger tournament, it's an idea that clearly works really well in American sports, and it's the type of thing that could allow these leagues to interact with each other in a meaningful way.
Well, look, I think if we go back 12 months or so when we started having a lot of these conversations, it was a recognition in terms of sustainability for environmental reasons, that you shouldn't be flying all the way around the world all the time. You shouldn't be bringing, that's that for the environment itself. It can be difficult for the players having to travel 5,000 or 6,000 miles to play a game, and to come back again is really hard on the body. But sport is built around rivalries. It's built about players playing incredibly well, having an edge, not predetermined winners all the time, some sense of fairness, some sense of the haves and the have-nots, and how you can have somebody coming from behind the scenes and finally getting a championship like Connacht did a few years ago, unlikely winners, but lauded for the fact that they were, and in the style that they did it. So those things can happen, but it's all built around big rivalries. And I think some of the criticism for the Rainbow, it was a mishmash of a competition that was put in, trying to deal with circumstances beyond anybody's control. There's two elements I think that have worked really well for this, is that there's a lot of guys that are playing in the Pro 14 that wanted to get picked on a Lions tour, and then want to have a high level of form going in the Lions tour. And there's that great rivalry. And on the other side, you have the South Africans, who have not played a huge amount of high level rugby, are really keen to get rugby under their belt because of a Lions tour, and so in many respects it's worked out pretty well. It was still hard to get a high sense of energy into supporting something that will be here for now and will be gone soon after. Having said all that, some of the games have been of great quality, and I thought the Connacht result against Munster proved that Munster took things a little bit lightly. Their attitude was a bit off for the game, and Connacht ate them alive. And that was it's a great performance, because you have to turn up fully for every single game. And it was hard for us to think of that, looking at it from the outset and saying some players were going to rest lots of players, bring a lot of young guys through. I think those things have happened, and I still think the performance has been very good.
In terms of the format, though, is there something there that we can learn and apply? You obviously floated the idea of a Lions League, where essentially the Premiership and the Pro 14/16 or whatever it's going to be would actually merge. What's your view on what the most likely, and actually not skip most likely, what's the best thing? What would be the best thing in your view in terms of the local domestic league that we play in?
Well, look, for me, the best thing is a Lions League, because I think it uses the markets very, very well. It can build up high levels of rivalry. And one of the great things for the European Cup, the Heineken Cup, has been that the rivalry that has started to build up on those European big days have led to huge rugby days and huge rivalries. And like we're talking about days when we're not getting many people into the ground, but we want to fill our stadia all the time, and they are not filling for the Pro 14. There's a level of inertia around it that a lot of the games aren't being treated as seriously as possibly. So I think the number of games needs to be cut fairly radically during the year. I think as it stands at the moment, the season is far too long and not enough games of high enough quality for the teams to excel as much as they can. And it doesn't mean getting rid of the Pro 14 and having another competition entirely in its place. I just think you need to get rid of 4 or 6 weekends a year and try and get a bit of quality there. Get your squads a little bit smaller too, and see what can happen. But for me, a Lions League works for you get the best of the countries on these islands. And look, I know Benetton are kind of riding high in the Rainbow Cup at the moment, but I don't think it can be fair to say that the Italian teams have done well in the Pro 14. And have offered a huge amount towards it. And I think it's a geographical anomaly anyway, where they are. But now that's what I think should happen. There should be a Lions League of huge parts of rivalry, of national competitions in the midst of it, combined in whatever conference system that you put together. Do I think that's likely? I think it may even be more likely now than it was. But I think it could be 3 or 4 years away. I think it gets to the idea of what the commercial arrangements are and how those contracts get merged over time. And that's one of the things I would say that CVC may have brought closer because of owning different parts of different competitions. I think it may mean that they can get the most out of all of them.
Keith, could I just ask you about maybe what the view from World Rugby might hypothetically be in this scenario? So, like you're talking about the Italian teams there who haven't been amazing, even at international level in Six Nations, they've been poor for a long time. And there is this constant debate at the end of every Six Nations campaign about whether or not Italy should be in the competition in the long term. I wonder what World Rugby think about the sort of promotion of the game in less developed countries. As you say, it's a very young professional sport, and how that tallies to maybe future moves towards a Lions League or to getting the big teams playing each other more and more often.
Yeah, look, I think that's one of the issues within the game, and there's a big drive. So World Rugby's drive has been consistently to try and bring rugby to wider parts of the world, and knowing how commercially difficult that is. But for me, I think you want the teams that offer a huge amount of players into the system. I think Fiji, Tonga, Samoa are some of the best players in the world are being drafted into other countries for that reason. And I think it's very important that they get brought up. I think that Japan has to be brought far more to the top table than it is, because they offer something that's really big and really interesting. But these are countries that have a history of the sport. They've always had a history of the sport. Rugby, in its drive to be more global, in my view, makes it a bit more difficult. And I know that that's an unpopular opinion. But rugby is a complicated sport. It's not easy to pick up at 18, 19, 20 years of age. It's something you need to play for far longer. Sevens, however, is far less complicated and easier to pick up. And that's where for me, the growth of the game needs to be, through that in the women's game. But trying to think that everybody around the world can get the structures in place to go and play rugby, for me, is a flaw. It's like, for me, football is a simple game. It's very easy to play, very easy to coach. Not easy to coach very well or play very well, but it's a very easily understandable game. Rugby is still incredibly complicated, and the laws of the game are incredibly complicated. And you know they are, because referees argue about them, players argue about them all the time.
Yeah.
It isn't black and white. And so I think for the drive to make the game bigger and wider could do the opposite. It could dilute the game, because it's an awful lot of it's very, very good. And I think we kind of say, well, it's not being very fair. not sure that it is very fair, but I also think that that's the reality.
One last question on this before we go on this, because this is one of the things we need to talk about. The notion of a split season, are you, as a traditionalist, wedded to the games starting on Valentine's weekend and finishing on St. Patrick's weekend? Or actually, if those games happened in April and May at the end of the season in the Six Nations, would they be a better spectacle? Would that be good for the sport? What's your view?
I was always wedded to it. But I think everybody has to accept that there may be some part of change. I think it fits into a huge amount of the cultural significance of the game. If it was a little bit later, would that make a huge difference or not? I think if you hold one competition out for what it is in itself and its time, I think you lose the sense of it. So the rest of the season would have to make sense for that to be the case. And it then still goes down to that level of viability. And the one thing we've skirted around here is that in France and in England, in particular, France, England and Japan, owners own the teams, not the unions. And so that level of control is the one that is at the most, the hottest point of conflict over how you can restructure the season. So I think there's an awful lot more needs to be brought to the table. And if there's any route that you can tidy that up, where the professional game in those countries are run separately to the amateur game, maybe. Look, I actually think you have to put everything up in the air and see what happens, and see if it can fall. Because at the moment, the constant conflict and the constant pushing and pulling of players doesn't do the game a service at all.
The last thing we wanted to ask you about was O'Gara was on Monday night talking with Joe about Will Skelton's fitness, and he said, look, he lost the head with him, and it was not a calm debate. It was one of those moments where he felt if the team was going to achieve what it was capable of achieving, that harsh words needed to be spoken. And I just wondered, like, do forwards take kindly to being told they need to shift a bit of weight?
Are you looking at me in particular for that one? I think you look, for me, I listened to that article or that conversation that you had with ROG. If he's the coach and he thinks the guy is too big, he's too big. That's it, you know, and that's what he's there for. That's the coach. And you know what? You either complain about it. What do? Get bigger. Don't put the effort in and be found out to have been not as fit enough, or not pushing yourself hard enough, or not being efficient enough for the team. What you want to do is get better. Nobody likes to be dressed down in public. There's nobody anywhere likes that to happen. And Rog said he lost it. He wasn't in control of it. Now Rog is well able to lose control. So, but that was something that meant a lot to him at that stage, to be able to say it. Now, if Skelton had reacted badly, that could have reflected badly on Rog, but he didn't. And that for me is a mark of respect, even at the very start of his career with La Rochelle, that the players had for him, that they said, oh my God, I'm getting a bollocking from this little out half, and Skelton's a giant of a man. And he said, well, I'd like to be better. Players want to be better all the time. I think you'd rather get the bollocking than being patted on the back and said, yeah, you're fine, you're okay. Guys want to get better.
We know that life has changed from the old school hairdryer treatment that Ferguson would have dished out famously in the Manchester United changing room. We know that people are less capable of taking that. People are less inclined to give that, because the world has definitely moved on. And yet there's always going to be room in a professional sports environment where the outcome decides bonuses and jobs and contracts and money, and it is a competitive business. It's baked into the actual day-to-day. It's not like a normal work environment. There's always going to be that tension between what you can and can't say, and finding that line in any coach's journey is hugely important.
Well, look, you need to be very good technically as a coach. You need to understand the ins and outs of huge amounts of it, and to be able to rely on other technical coaches. But you also need to understand human nature, and you need to be able to understand each individual as an individual and what makes them tick. That's part of coaching as well. And Whether he went on it by design or out of frustration, he got to what it was that Nick Skelton needed to make himself into a fitter, better player. And I think we saw the outcome of that all season. Skelton's had the best season I've seen him play rugby. He's had an impact on everything he's done. So I think you do need to get that tension, that balance between the two. Sport is an amazing business, which we never like saying, but it's one where emotion is just key to every component of it. It's the emotion that you're able to control on the field. It's the how you're able to deal with the pressure or deal with rejection or failure, and how you're able to deal with that as a fan. It's all wrapped up into something that doesn't matter a huge amount and matters a huge deal. So I think that's one of the great intangibles of coaching. And if you go to about the hairdryer and Alec Ferguson, he was, of his time, the most successful coach that was around, but he wasn't hairdryer every day. You know, you have to pick your moments when that happens, and it loses its effect if that's all you're doing. So you need to have different things: the arm around the shoulder. You need to have all the technical capabilities. Look, it's not simple. And look, I think we've talked a huge amount about ROG over the last period of time, and I know he's on the media, and I know he is coaching, and he's building up his coaching pedigree. I think to this point he's done an extraordinary job, and for him to fall at the hurdle is almost kind of part of the story as to what's going to happen on the next hurdles, and can he get to that level of achievement. So to this point, in my view, when I look at ROG, I look at the way he was as a player, which is entirely the wrong thing to do, but natural for us, and to say that he failed often at the start and succeeded often at the end. And I thought he was a better player for it at the end, and he could be a better coach for this at the end as well. Who
had the ability to brandish the hairdryer more than anybody else in Irish rugby during your playing days?
In Irish rugby, we didn't have too many. I mean, I did myself a bit, you know, for fair, and I definitely did it too much. And I don't have any objection criticizing myself for that fact, and you're trying to learn these things all the time. But I felt in the absence of any voice or consistent voice, you needed a voice that was there. And I'm saying that after the fact, but I felt it at the time, but I got it wrong often. The one I liked was the sort of almost the veiled threat voice. And if I would say Jim Telfer for me, and that was Lions, and he was wonderful. So there was a fear of letting him down, which was something, but that wasn't a weight. There was something important in that, but he had the right thing said at the right time. Within Ireland, we had Gatland at different times was good with the arm around the shoulder, was good with the bollocking was needed. Eddie was as well at different times. And again, it's trying to figure out how they deal with all the players, because coaches play favourites, and that gets seen through as well, and that can destabilise at different times too. And we didn't have a huge amount of hairdryer, apart from myself, I suppose.
All right. Keith, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Brilliant. Cheers, lads.